Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining in for our Sunday evening lesson. We're going to continue and conclude our study in the book of Judges. So if you will, please turn with me to Judges chapter 20. We still have 2 chapters to cover, but we're not going to cover too much of chapter 21. It's just kind of a summary of everything that had happened in chapter 20 and the results and consequences of chapter 20. If you remember the last couple weeks, we have noticed a couple of really disturbing things since chapter 17. I mean, this whole book has really been pretty disturbing, to be honest with you, the things that were going on in Israel in this era. But 17 and on have really shown how far Israel has fallen in the thrust of these few chapters. These last 4 or 5 chapters is there was no king in Israel in those days, and everybody did what was right in their own eyes. And now things have just continually gotten from bad to worse until we arrive to chapter 20, when Israel goes to war with itself. Israel attacks the tribe of Benjamin because of what had happened with the Levites' concubine in that tribe's land area. It says in verse 1, "Then all the people of Israel came out." This is when they had all the tribes had received the severed pieces of the Levites' concubine that had been raped and murdered from the last chapter. It says, "And all the people came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead. And the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. And the chiefs of all the people, of all the tribes of Israel, presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot that drew the sword." It's a pretty sizable army. "Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, 'Tell us, how did this evil happen?'" So they're putting an entire tribe on trial here. Now the Levite has been brought in to answer the questions. The people are ready for war. So they've brought him in to ask him, see what's going on. The Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, "I came to Gibeah that belongs to Benjamin. I and my concubine to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose against me and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead. So I took hold of my concubine and cut her in pieces and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here." And all the people arose as one, saying, "None of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people, that when they come they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the outrage that they have committed in Israel." So all the men of Israel gathered against the city, united as one man. Now, we can understand their outrage of what has happened here. They seem surprised, although all of Israel has gone through a very dark time period of evil and wickedness. But I do not believe from their response that they had understood how terrible and how deep the sin had become. And so now they are presented with this evidence, morbid evidence of what sin has done to the people. And just as this woman's body had been severed and sent throughout, it's really symbolic of what sin does, not just to a person. She was innocent of any wrongdoing when it comes to this horrible event. She was treated as an object and disposed as rubbish. So yeah, this is a difficult chapter to really read. The next 2 chapters are some of the darkest chapters in all of the Bible. And so the people have finally been shaken out of their slumber as to how evil and wicked things are in their nation. Unfortunately, it usually takes some pretty bad things to wake people up. And just as unfortunate, when people wake up, bad things will be the result for a little while. And we certainly see that here in Judges chapter 20. So in verse 8, it says, all the people arose as one man. We already read that. They're talking about drafting an army, and they're going to go down to Gibeah. Said they gathered against the city, united as one man. It says, and the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, what evil is this that has taken place among you? In other words, they're really saying, you should have dealt with this. This happened in your area, your jurisdiction, should have dealt with it. What's going on here? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that may put them to death, and purge evil from Israel. But the Benjaminites would not listen to the voice of the brothers, the people of Israel. Then the people of Benjamin came together out of the cities of Gibeah to go out to battle against the people of Israel. And the people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. Among all these were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. At first glance, it looks like this is going to be a slaughter. There's 26,000 men plus 700 on Benjamin's side. Now, it is interesting that it says there in Gibeah that these men, they were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. All right, so a lot of times when we think of the slings that they used in biblical days, we think of the slingshots you can buy at Walmart. There in the sporting goods section. Pretty close to the guns, but they're not guns. You certainly wouldn't want to get hit with one, and I suppose they could probably do a lot of damage and maybe even kill somebody. But that's not what these things were. You're not going to be able to kill a bear or a lion or a giant with this kind of slingshots that we are accustomed to. A sling is completely different. And they did have elite soldiers, as these men were, 700 of them. They had elite soldiers that could hit very tightly. They were marksmen with these things. I've even read that these weapons would have been the rifles of the ancient East. They weren't as powerful as rifles. That's not what we're trying to say. But if you had people who knew what they were doing with these slings, and you had a bunch of them, you would have a pretty nice advantage. And they were able to hit a hair and not miss, it says. But then you had 400,000 men of Israel. So you think even the 26,000 men, even if they had the 700, they're gonna be able to overcome that. Well, in verse 18, we'll see what all happens here. The people of Israel rose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin? So not all 400,000 are going. The Lord said, Judah shall go up first. And the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin. And the men of Israel drew up to the battle line against them at Gibeah. And the people of Benjamin came out at Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. The people of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening. And they inquired of the Lord, shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? The Lord said, go up against them. So the people of Israel came near against the people of Benjamin the second day. And Benjamin went against them out at Gibeah the second day and destroyed 18,000 men of the people of Israel. All right, so in 2 days, Israel is routed. 22,000 the first day, 18,000 the second day. That's 40,000 men. If we do the math, they've just lost in 2 days 10% of their army. That is not good When it comes to the numbers, that's frightening. When it comes to the fact that these people were real men, husbands, fathers, sons, it's heartbreaking. This is the cost of sin that had gone unchecked. It continued to rise. And now the blood of men, fathers, husbands, sons, brothers, uncles, grandsons, has been spilt because sin had gone unchecked. It was not dealt with when it should have been dealt with for hundreds of years, and now it has reached a boiling point, a tipping point, and many suffer. Not just the men who died, their families. It was bad for the morale of the nation. The country is split. Sin is a horrible thing. %10 of their army gone. It says in verse 26, "And all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. They sat there before the Lord and fasted that day until the evening, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. The people of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days, and Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, Shall we go on once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin, or shall we cease? And the Lord said, Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand." So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah, and the people of Israel went up against the people of Benjamin on the third day, and set themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times. The people of Benjamin went out against the people and were drawn away from the city, and as at other times they began to strike and kill some of the people in the highways, one of which goes up from Bethel, or up to Bethel rather, and the other to Gibeah, and in the open country, about 30 men of Israel. And the people of Benjamin said, They are routed before us, as at the first. But the people of Israel said, Let us flee and draw them away from the city to the highways. So we see the strategy that they're putting in here. They're trying to trap them. And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place and set themselves in array at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel who were in ambush rushed out of their place from Merageba. And there came against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and the battle was hard. But the Benjamites did not know that disaster was close upon them. They got a little too confident. They had won the first two battles. They think that this is easy. They've been lulled to sleep by their own success. Go back to verse 35. The Lord defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these were men who drew the sword. So the people of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. 25,100 men. That's almost 100% of their army. 900 short. And then you add in 700 from Gibeah. We had 26,700 altogether. 25,100 are killed in battle. Civil war is a terrible thing. Absolutely horrible. And it seems that civil war sometimes are among the worst. We saw it in our own nation, 160 years ago or so. How terrible that war went, how many people were killed. Father against son, brother against brother. Families divided. Not just the nation was divided, families were divided, churches were divided. Lots of people died. Lots of suffering. I don't know what it is about civil war. I've got some ideas. I don't know what it is about civil war that brings out even the worst in people. It did here. Many people died in 3 days. And again, it's all because sin had gone unchecked. They didn't follow the will of God. They didn't do what God had told them to do. They allowed the sin to get in and to continue to grow until there was nothing they could do about it, except for this. So, the men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin because they trusted the men in ambush whom they had set against Gibeah, there in verse 36. Then the men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in the main ambush was that when they made a great cloud of smoke rise up out of the city, the men of Israel should turn in battle. Well, Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. They said, "Surely they are defeated before us as in the first battle." When the signal began to rise out of the city in the column of smoke, it's just giving us more detail as to how it happened. The Benjaminites looked behind them, and behold, the whole city went up in smoke to heaven. And the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw that disaster was close upon them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness, but the battle overtook them. And those who came out of the cities were destroying them in their midst. Surrounding the Benjaminites, they pursued them and trod them down from Noah, as far as opposite Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell. I'm not sure how to like I said, it's just giving us different details, not contradicting, just giving us different details at different times how they died in the battle. So 18,000 men fell, and they were pursued hard to Gideon, and 2,000 men of them were struck down. So it's giving us details of the 20,000, how 20,000 fell, and then Saul who fell of the city were about 25,000 men who drew the sword. All of them were men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness of the rock of Rimmon, and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin, and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men, and beasts, and all they found. And all the towns they found, they set on fire. So pretty much what we're seeing here is one entire tribe of Israel is on the verge of extinction. What a high price sin has wrought. High price it still brings to us today. Now in chapter 21 we see the people of Israel are now saddened. And they even say something here in verse 1. Out of their anger, none of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin. In other words, they're saying, it's done. As far as we're concerned, Benjamin is over. We're not going to let them have any more children and rebuild. So they made an oath. Sometimes the oaths that people make are very interesting. We understand why they make them, but then they usually regret them later on. And then we see them crying bitterly before God. And they are saddened. They're mourning because so many of their own have been killed, and they killed them. Now, you can continue down through here, and we see that they set up a system. They changed their mind. You can get down to verse 10 and 11 and 12. They changed their mind. They realize we need to get Benjamin back. And you can see how they decide to do that there in verses 8 through 12. It says, and they said, What one is there of the tribes of Israel that did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah? And behold, no one come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were mustered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 of their bravest men there and commanded them, Go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword. So the women, also the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman that is lain with a male you shall devote to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him. And they brought them to the camp of Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. In verse 13 it says, And the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them women whom they had saved alive from the women of Jabesh Gilead. But they were not enough for them, and the people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. All right, so they steal 400 young women and give them to the soldiers that had survived the war, because Benjamin is apparently almost completely extinct. And the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin?" There's no women. They went completely crazy in their lust for vengeance. They said there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe not be blotted out from Israel. But we cannot give them daughters cannot give them wives from our daughters, because we've sworn that we would not do that. In fact, they swore a curse on those who would give his daughter as a wife to anyone of Benjamin. So then they came up with another plan. Verse 19, "Behold, there is a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh." Up to this point, this is where the tabernacle would be. In Shiloh, the tabernacle would move to Jerusalem when King David begins his reign, but right now it's at Shiloh. So this is going to be a holy ground, holy city. So there's a yearly feast of the Lord at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebanon. And they commanded the people of Benjamin, saying, "Go and lie in ambush in the vineyards, and watch. If the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, and come out of the vineyards, and snatch each man his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. When their fathers or brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, Grant them graciously to us, because we did not take for each man of them his wife in battle. Neither did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty." So again, go kidnap yourself some wives. You're not guilty for doing this, because the Benjamites came and kidnapped them, and let's just let them do it, because we don't want Benjamin to cease. It says, "So and the people of Benjamin did so, and took their wives according to their number, from the dancers whom they carried off, when they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. The people of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. They went out from every man to his inheritance." They did the deed. They did what they avoided breaking their oath, but they did some pretty shady things to avoid the breaking of the oath. The last verse of Judges sums up this chapter. They were confused. The nation was confused. And the nation was confused because they did not follow God. The author says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There's no one who was enforcing the laws. They just did whatever they wanted to do. They'd stopped following God many years before. In fact, only 2 generations did follow God before all of this craziness began to take place. And for generations they were locked in a cycle of depravity that spiraled ever downward until blood was shed and an entire tribe was nearly lost. Interesting thing, however, it would not be long before, through what they decided to do, that Benjamin would regain, and in fact become a very prominent tribe in Israel. The very first king of Israel, shortly after these things took place, would be from the tribe of Benjamin, King Saul, who turned out to be a pretty pathetic king indeed. But, with that being said, he did things at first that were good. Many years later, we would run into another Saul, who we call Paul. Paul is his Greek name, Saul was his Hebrew name. He also was from the tribe of Benjamin. This is an instance of seeing how God takes something that is broken and nearly completely destroyed, and giving it back a place of prominence and a place of hope. The lesson there is sin can utterly destroy, but God can completely restore. And he will, if we only let him. Well, thank everyone for listening this evening. I hope you have enjoyed these lessons on the book of Judges. I'm not entirely sure what we will look at next week. I'll be thinking about that, and then I will let you know next Sunday evening when we begin. Anyway, thank you all very much, and I hope you all stay safe and well. Continue praying, and just keep on keeping on, and we will see you soon. Bye-bye, and God bless.